It took me way too long to get to this. I guess you can only see the most minimalistic and cleanest approach once you're done with your journey. For the past 6 years, even though it wasn't a conscious effort, I've actually made a few iterations on the concept of integrating the GameCube adapter to the Switch dock. And yet, at some points in the last months, I just realized I missed the cleanest way to do it. I guess it's a fitting end to the Switch One. And at the time I thought that maybe I could also replicate the idea on the Switch 2. I've actually made a few attempts at this concept. It all started with the GameCube Switch dock integration. You've seen the video. Basically it's just integrating a whole Switch dock and a GameCube adapter inside of a GameCube shell. Just know that ever since the video I've made a few more. I've had the opportunity to make the design a little bit better. And since I mostly made them for Smash Bros. Events, I was asked to integrate more things inside it, namely a USB hub, which is very handy, and also directly an Ethernet adapter. And also I took this occasion to make the whole thing stronger on the inside by adding a bracket to support the USB-C port, because people would take their Switch in and out repeatedly and eventually they would either break or have a loose connection. So these were reinforced. All in all, very quickly, it was a fun project for the channel. I was really glad to see people trying to replicate it for themselves. I also printed a few of the parts to give out to people to help them build it, and it was really fun to get messages from people trying to build it, trying to get help, day-to-day help. Really a positive experience. I then moved on to this second approach, which is very simple, which is basically a cable management thing that is 3D printed in one part. I was trying to find a way to integrate the GameCube adapter and the Switch into a single package, but make it really easily available, easy to print in one part, easy to assemble. Again, you've seen the video. What you haven't seen is what came after. I was lucky, I was fortunate to sell a few hundreds. That doesn't sound like a lot, but my production capability was about of one per day. So I had to figure out a lot of stuff. I had to figure out company stuff, sending, packaging, taxes, and this makes the whole thing very expensive in my opinion. If you think it's too expensive, it's because it is. I recommend taking the opportunity, if you want this, to learn to 3D print, take my files, 3D print them for yourself. Over the last few years, I've updated the design a little bit. Upon request or not, some people have suggested that I do a version where the whole front is flush and basically you see only the holes. I wouldn't have thought of it, but it looks good. I've made a version for the May Flash adapter, which is slightly wider to accommodate the cheaper option basically. And also a lot of people have asked me to adapt it to the Oled dock for the Switch, which is very slightly different in dimensions. I've been very lazy about that, but for the occasion of this video, I ended up doing it. I just widened the design a little bit and accommodated the very slight differences on the bottom of the Oled dock from the original dock. Unbelievably, it took me years to finish, but now it's available if you want it. And after that, I moved on to a very simple little distraction. This is basically nothing, but it fits the theme of all of these projects. When I went to Smash locals, very small events, we didn't always have enough screens to play on, so we would play on our Switches and prop them up. And so this is basically just a little support to have your Switch and your GameCube adapter at the bottom, enough space for a USB-C cable, and you can just play on the go. And I wanted to have it in a very cute and stylish package. But basically I designed this in an afternoon, and you have little holes for your cable management, everything. But I think there are many other commercial products that recapitulate the function of this. It does the job. I don't think it makes sense to release as a product in my opinion, but I should really make the files available. And then I have to talk about this thing because it took me a lot of time, mostly because some people were interested in the product. It's basically an evolution on the design of my previous 3D printed cable management thing. but just adding the functionality of locking everything up, again for Smash events or for local bars or stuff like that. You've probably seen Switch dock locks. This just adds the function of having your GameCube adapter in it. The base principle is that it blocks the back of the Switch dock as well, so you can't really rip out the cables. The cartridge is blocked as well because of the arm, and the big holes on the side add a little functionality because now you can bolt this or use a bike lock to bolt this to a table, basically. The locking arm grabs the back, and in one motion you can just automatically find the right place. I made also the locking part pretty thick, so you can't use any padlock with this, it has to be big enough. This is mostly a functional thing, but I did try to give it a fun design. I used very thick walls to make it very strong, but also use sharp angles to make it look very sturdy, look tough. And again, I want this to be able to print in one sitting in place, no supports, no everything, so that means that I have to be mindful of the size of the ceilings. Just make sure that the ceilings are small enough in my design and that the bridging of the 3D printer can deal with it. I used very tight tolerances to make it snap into place. And this also means that you can just snap your GameCube adapter and Switch dock in it, don't use the arm, and still have this be a cable management thing again. I've seen some people use it like this in their home, so it does both functions basically. So my biggest problem with this design was actually the padlock in itself, because it's not really beautiful, you have to find the right one, it also gives you a big leverage if you wanted to break the thing, and it's always in the way of the cables, it doesn't really look so optimized. So that's why I moved on to a design where I actually integrated the padlock part into the safety. It's more of a door lock padlock basically. I just modified the smallest door lock possible to be able to fit with my design and modified the key lock part. I do believe that by delocalizing it inside, I do make the front a bit more flush and I make effractions a bit more hard, but mostly it's just for looks and I do think it looks slicker that way. This is basically just an upgrade of the previous design. The challenge here is space, because the only part that you have to work with is basically the width of the Switch dock minus the width of the GameCube adapter, and that's not a whole lot of place to work with. I had to find a padlock, a mailbox lock that would fit these constraints and still modifying it by 3D printing, and also design my own tools to be able to assemble this in the very constrained space that I got. So this actually prints in 4 parts with the tools included, but it does print upright without support, and there's a little bit of assembly process in it. That's why I never released this, because it's made to be assembled by me. Not that it's hard, but there are some steps. The barrel lock snaps in with a bit of strength, and then I tighten it with its own nut, but I do have to use my custom wrench that's thin enough to fit in the space, but still strong enough to tighten it correctly. And then I insert the 3D lock thing and screw it in. It has guides to help me. And then I close it all down with the final top part that I screw in with 3 screws. So again, you need to find the right screws to be able to work with my design. You might also think that those are easy to access and maybe easy to destroy, and they probably are very flimsy, but when the dock is in a locked position with the Switch dock on top and the GameCube adapter at the bottom, they are completely inaccessible. So that does make it very safe and hard to access. And I did have a lot of occasions to optimize the building process of this, because I ended up selling a few hundreds of this. I never advertised it, but this must have answered a niche question, a problem, because a lot of tournament organizers and some bars and local events ended up buying a few from me. Of course, I always offer to customize it to their needs. One of the things that's especially useful and appreciated is to number each setup, so that the guys can basically carry out a big key ring with all the keys on it, and they always know which key open which lock. And basically that's it. It's not a very fun object, but it does fit the job description and fill the function of locking your Switch dock and your GameCube adapter together when you're on the go or at an event. And then this one is more of a fun one and something that's not completely fully realized. It just represents all of the other little ideas and projects that I had to integrate the GameCube adapter into the Switch dock. This one is basically a big screen with your little ports and a full Switch dock at the back. The idea was just to make a big dock with the screen, with the whole package that you needed to play. I really wanted to make a sort of travel dock, a big dock basically, a setup to play anywhere, but I never pushed it very far. There are other options out there very similar to this, better realized than this. And so now basically I just crudely glued it together and I use it as my monitor screen for my camera. So I will never finish this, never rethink this. If I had a need for it, I would just basically buy a secondary screen and it would do exactly the same job. This one though, I did put a lot of thought into. The goal on this one was basically to make, to my criteria, the best Switch dock possible. When you go to a friend's house or a Smash event, you do have to bring your whole setup with you, your Switch dock, your GameCube adapter, your cables, your AC adapter, your HDMI, everything. But with this, you can reduce it all to the size of basically just the GameCube adapter. And it can do all of the stuff that a normal dock can do. It can also play on the go with just looking at the screen of the Switch. There's a special mode for that. And you can use any AC adapter you want with it, and even like an external battery, you don't have to use the specific Nintendo AC adapter, which changes things drastically. So this is theoretically made possible by finding basically an off-brand Switch docks that fits my criteria. So I tried a few from AliExpress and I was looking for functionality, but also a PCB, a board that was small enough to fit in this package. I picked this one because even though it looked wide, the PCB was small enough and there were many USB connections, all the stuff that I needed. There's not a lot to this project in terms of tinkering. It's just basically a permanent USB connection soldered using 4 wires from the Mayflash adapter at the bottom to the PCB of the Switch dock at the top. The most interesting part is the case itself. I try to make it good looking and the smallest possible, and to look as small as possible as well. To begin with, you'll notice that there is a slanted joint between the two halves. This introduces a lot of issues for 3D printing, but it also has a point. Basically, the problem that it solves is that the bottom part has to be as tall as the GameCube ports on the front, but the top part also has to be as tall as all of the ports of the Switch dock PCB at the back. But actually, the dock PCB is slightly on the back of the GameCube ports, so that it's recessed into the Mayflash adapter. It can sit lower, and I can gain a lot of height with that by intertwining basically the two PCBs. That's definitely not the only way to fix this issue, but I do think it looks fun, and it makes the whole assembly painless because you basically have one PCB screwed to the top half, one PCB screwed to the bottom half, then you connect the two and then you just sandwich them together. Okay, but now with this slanted joint, I did create a problem. I don't have a flat part on the bottom. To 3D print, this is really inconvenient. So I can't really print upside down as well because I want the top part to look as good as possible. So the fix for this was to use supports, of course, but not slicer-made supports. I would have an uneven finish and it would definitely show. So I ended up designing my own supports, which is not very complicated, just through a little bit of trial and error, trying to find basically the perfect distance between layers so that they would easily snap off, but still look good on the finished product. And so This mainly prints in two parts with the supports together, and then you just snap them off with your finger and it's really easy. The bottom part is just a copy of the screw posts in the Mayflash case and a few ventilation holes at the back just in case. And for the GameCube ports, first they snap into place and then another 3D printed part just comes in to secure them so that they survive the repeated insertions of GameCube cables as often as you want. And I tried to make this part functional with one central screw that just fixes it all into place, and then the other two screws that sandwich between the three parts of the whole case to make it really sturdy. It secures the top, the middle, and the back at the bottom as well. For the design of the top part, I made a mix of slanted planes and rounded corners for it to look as small as possible and still have a bit of design identity. I tried to print all three parts with a bit of detail and the little button at the back as well. The build is very simple, it's just a soldering of a permanent connection between the two PCBs. Basically, I solder 4 wires, I reuse the USB cables for the connections. I also reuse all of the screws to make it simple. I do have to remove one USB port. When I remove it from the dock PCB, I always run the risk of snapping off the little traces on the PCB. They are very flimsy. I already do hate soldering to USB because you have to have cables of exactly the same length if you want to make sure that it works. And with these very small traces, I always have a little bit of trouble, but I always make it work. I get it working in the end. I did at least once have to basically follow the traces back to the chip to solder directly to it, but it always ends up working, and once it works, I just glue it all up and make sure that it's sturdy for a long time. And then when the connection is secure, I just have to assemble, screw both parts together, test it and make sure it works, and just enjoy the fun of just carrying around a simple box that holds all of your setup in the size of a GameCube adapter. I definitely made a few of these for friends, but I never offered it for sale because it's very much a pain to make, and I don't think it would be very sensible in terms of price, but it is a very fun and very dear to me object because it just ticks all of the boxes of what I want inside in a Switch dock basically. It's what I thought was, at the time, the best integration of the GameCube adapter and the Switch dock. I thought I was done with this, but I then had the idea, the simplest idea, of just integrating the GameCube adapter directly into the Switch dock. This is basically the product I would have wanted for me. Your Switch dock with just ports for your GameCube directly into it. And the GameCube adapter is directly inside, nothing more to connect. When I started to think about it, I just couldn't unsee it. There is a very convenient bump on the side of the Switch dock at the bottom of the Switch, and the dock is actually pretty thick. When I started to take apart the dock and looked inside, clearly I saw that I would have to make modifications, but there was a very good chance that this will fit. Of course, I never thought of this before because all we had to work with were the official GameCube controller adapter, which were pretty big with big PCBs, but with modern advances in third-party, actually good adapters, it started to look like it would be possible. Nowadays, there are actually very smart people over at Input Integrity that make a super small GameCube adapter that supports all of the functions of the official one, that behave like the official one, and that are really small, and also tournament legal. When I saw that little thing, I knew that I had my work cut out for me. I just had to manage to fit the GameCube ports into the Switch dock, and the rest would be normally easy. And if you look at the back, there's actually some dead air between the two panes of plastic at the back of the switch dock, and it would be a perfect place to fit and route all of my cables. I think I have about just one layer of cable available here without any modifications. And of course here, the idea is to be as discreet as possible and to try to make it look like this was always meant to be like this. It was definitely scary to cut the holes at the front because I don't have the possibility to mess it up. The whole project lives on the fact that the front looks good, and so I had to make sure that I cut really small at first, measured every time, and use a file or sandpaper to make sure that the holes were perfectly lined up and of the exact size of a GameCube port. This is basically the main piece, so I have to have it perfect. Thankfully, the fit was very snug, very exact, so that's when I decided that I would glue the GameCube ports directly into the front part, because it just looks so much better like that with this very snug finish. The GameCube ports would definitely not fit just like that in the switch dock, so I did have to remove a lot of material at some parts, including some screw posts. Thankfully, with the ones that are left, I should have enough structural integrity to be able to close the dock and for it to keep its basic shape. I tried as much as possible not to introduce any scratches that I didn't need. I tried to preserve the good-looking faces of the dock, marked the spots where I needed more space, and always tried with some test fits to see if I cut enough. Moving on to the PCB of the GameCube adapter, I had to desolder the GameCube ports to extend them. I ended up getting new ports because I completely ripped them out when desoldering them. They are very flimsy. Thankfully, I found the exact reference on AliExpress and could get some spares for that. And for this build, for the assembly of this build, I do need the GameCube ports and the PCB of the adapter to be able to be disconnected. So for that, I use small connectors that look very much like GPIO connections. Not all of the ports of the GameCube ports are necessary, so some can be put together in common, but I still went for 4 wires per port, which is a bit overkill. Each port has its ground and voltage line, even if they are common, but that way I'm sure that everything will work long term. Instead of measuring exactly the length of the cable and planing everything, I just did it all in situation. Put the parts where everything needed to go and cut the wires accordingly and did the soldering in situation basically. I do have to be mindful of the fact that I have only space for one flat layer of cable at the back. They cannot cross one another, so I have to cable manage basically smartly. I had to 3D print a little stand for the PCB of the adapter, so basically I designed it very simply in Inventor by copying the design of the PCB and just reproduced the parts that I knew I didn't need to access for soldering, and then printed it simply in a few layers. I just put everything in position, no need to measure, just verified that I could get to the USB-C port and glued it in, and then I can glue in the PCB of the GameCube adapter. Then I put the back part of the switch dock just to check where I needed to cut, and then I could use my Dremel to just cut very cleanly, try to be as little intrusive as possible. The goal here is to make it look like this was always meant to be. Again, it doesn't have to be beautiful, but just clean enough to fit everything, and then hide everything with a little 3D printed extension on the back. So I really wish I could have fit the whole adapter and the PCB inside of the switch dock, but I would lose the ability to access the USB-C port. So I chose to make it stick out at the back very slightly with a 3D printed extension, but I tried to make it as discreet as possible, so that's why I printed it upright so that you would see the least possible artifacts from 3D printing, and so that the finish would look as similar as possible to the injection molded plastic from the Switch dock. This was simply designed from just taking the dimensions of the PCB, giving myself some margin, and then simply making sure the ports were accessible. It's simple and straight to the point. I just made it also the walls were thick enough so that they would be glued in easily. And then I just super glued it to the case to be sure that it's very secure. Then I glued in the GameCube adapter and did all of the wiring. Again, I have to make sure that the wires don't overlap, so I have to cable manage them one at a time next to each other. It's definitely not clean, but if I do a good enough job, I will be able to put back the back plastic of the Switch dock with no bumps, and you will never see these cables if they are thin enough. I had to make sure also that the cables that were under the PCB of the Switch dock didn't touch it, didn't risk to short it, and also didn't obstruct the small amount of airflow that it gets. And then I connected the GameCube ports and tested all of that. A final test with everything in position. So then I glued in the front GameCube ports, first temporarily, then definitively. It had to be strong enough to survive repeated insertions of cables. I glued them in to cut corners, but also because of how good the fit was. Then I put back the little LED. Now it had no more space to fit in, but it's an important function. So I put it back slanted. It's not beautiful, but it works like this. And then I reassembled the whole dock. So it was scary at some points, but the fit was just fine in most places. I did lose on some of the structural screw posts. My little connectors weren't particularly easy to work with and click together, but it worked as expected. And finally, I put in the back part, seeing if everything fits, put in the final screws. I was slightly worried about the structural integrity of the whole dock since I removed one of the structural screw posts. It feels fine, it feels very secure, but I kind of wanted to create another screw post, and so by just elongating one screw, making it bigger, I was able to make it sandwich the two back halves of the Switch dock. I just had to find a longer screw and make a very tiny hole at the back, quite precise, and it was aligned with an unused screw post because of the modifications I made to the design. Finally, the little back door clips in normally, and that's it. I can move on to the final peel of the tape of the front that I put to be safe. I am so glad that the front looks so clean. The point of it was to be discreet, that was to look like it came out of the factory like this. I'm really satisfied with that. And now I wonder if I will be able to do the same with the Switch 2. So I just finished this at the end of the life of the Switch 1, and when the Switch 2 came out, I directly moved on into it. The dock looks bigger, so it should be easier. In reality, it was not. So let's first start with taking apart the dock and seeing if there are some things that I can work with, if there's enough space. The assembly of the whole dock is actually very different from what it was with the Switch 1. But again, just like if this was meant to be, there is some dead space on both sides, almost shaped like two GameCube ports on each side of the dock. It will easily fit in width, but it's actually a bit too shallow. Sadly, it doesn't fit like that, but I definitely don't want to let go that easy, and I'm ready to reshape the GameCube ports into an imperfect circle, just like the connector itself, basically. I sanded up the GameCube connectors to save a few precious millimeters. I glued them together and sanded with a flat surface and made sure that it looked quite professional, and with that it should just barely fit. Then I went on to remove all of the electronics of the dock and start cutting it apart. When looking at the PCB of the Switch 2 dock, it doesn't look so different from the one from the Switch 1, basically. The PCB is very similar, it's probably revised, but there is more space and more airflow offered to it, and there is a fan, so things are definitely different, but this could work in my favor. I removed everything that could be damaged, and I started to mark down basically where to cut if needed. And I checked that there was nothing important underneath. I started to cut little by little and checking every time that I did not break anything precious and that I didn't cut more than was needed. As much as possible, I try to keep in the structural elements of the Switch dock. As for the front holes, again, I want to be very careful. This is the whole look of the build that depends on it. I cut small, I started from there, I cut bit by bit, and this time it was even harder because the holes were not at all circular because of the modification I made to the shape of the GameCube adapter ports. So it makes it even more difficult. I used a knife, I used sandpaper, I used a nail file. I tried to make the finish by eye to make it almost perfect. It's the detail that makes the whole piece, so I cannot botch it basically. Again, a very similar approach to the one on Switch 1. I used little connectors. This time I doubled them up to be more easily accessible for the double ports. And then I can secure the GameCube ports at the front with double component epoxy that will never go away. And I can move on to theorizing where I put my GameCube adapter PCB. The problem with the new shape of the Switch dock is that anywhere that I would want to put the GameCube adapter PCB would interfere with either airflow or the cables. With the new rounded shape, it's not that easy. And there is a big difference because this time at the back we have an Ethernet port, but we actually lost one USB from the Switch 1. It's actually, in my opinion, a loss because we don't have the flexibility of putting an Ethernet adapter here or a USB connection. And in my case, I couldn't directly connect the GameCube port adapter to the Switch dock from the little door at the back. So I had to rethink it completely differently, but I did notice that I had a lot of space between the new PCB and the actual plastic parts. And it would be very nice to be able to fit the GameCube adapter directly inside of the Switch dock. The fan probably made it so the PCB had to be raised up a little. It's very snug, but the PCB of the GameCube adapter should fit just next to the fan. And it would give me access to it from the USB-C port right on the corner of the Switch dock. I had to grind some plastic bits, gain a few millimeters here and there. I had to remove one screw post, but that shouldn't change anything and shouldn't make anything more fragile. I don't have a lot of free space, but still I wouldn't want to glue the PCB directly to the case. The bottom isn't really flat, so again I 3D printed a millimeter thin platform for everything to be level and to guide my installation. I didn't need to measure anything here, I just glue it all in position, making sure everything is in the right place by eye. And as always, I check that everything still fits. When I secure the adapter, even though the two PCBs will never touch, they are like a millimeter apart, so I still need to put a few layers of electric tape just in case. And so now I need to make the USB-C port on the GameCube adapter accessible from the outside. So that requires removing excess material on the other part of the Switch dock. Thankfully, it doesn't interfere with anything important, or it doesn't change the fan duct at the back of the Switch dock. It doesn't impact functionality at all. Obviously, I just don't want a big, huge gaping hole at the back of my Switch dock, so I'm going to design and print a very discreet replacement with 3D printing. This seems like a bit of a challenge because the Switch dock isn't exactly a simple shape to reproduce and it would take a lot of measurements. I want to be very quick about it, and so thankfully in modern times we all have these very high-end cameras in our pockets. This is just a $200 smartphone but it can still do 3D mapping with third-party apps like Polycam, which is free. Just a crude 3D scan will give me basically the rough shape of this, and I can import it directly into the modeling software of my choice and get the best possible reference to copy the design. All I need is to scale the model to something which I actually measured, and from then everything should be dimensionally accurate. It's very, very practical to go fast and to get a bit of a reference. I would have gotten this right anyway, but it would have taken a lot of trial and error, so this definitely changes things. When the whole is finally prepped and sanded and filed, I can just glue in my little 3D printed parts and move on to the final assembly, starting with the fan, putting back the USB port and its flex cable on the inside of the switch. I knew this flex cable would be a pain because now it interferes with two GameCube ports, but it ended up fitting without any modification. It's a bit weird because now I've introduced issues where I cannot put this all back together the correct way. I have to make it out of order, but anyway, I did end up putting it all together. It will work in the end. I can connect the GameCube ports to the GameCube adapter through those handy little connectors. Make sure the cables don't stack up too high to touch the switch dock PCB. I secure all those connectors and put a bit of tape as well to be sure that nothing shorts. And now I can put back the PCB of the switch to dock, connect everything to it and screw it down, put the back plate and basically peel the last bit of tape at the front, and now it's done. The finish is as good as I expected. I do think it looks better on Switch 1, but it makes so much more sense on Switch 2 now that GameCube games are actually available. It just makes sense that you can connect your GameCube controllers directly into your Switch dock to enjoy the games that are proposed on the platform. I'm very glad I explored this project and also that I persevered to make it on Switch 2. It's a very neat farewell to the Switch 1 in my opinion. I really wish as a consumer that I had this product for me when I was playing Smash for years on the Switch. And I'm really glad that I got to recapitulate all of the docks and the adapters that I designed over the last few years. All of the models that you could want are available in the description for a very small fee if you want. I'm thinking about selling these docks if someone wants them for the Switch 1 and for the Switch 2. They are one of a kind so far, so if you want them, have a look at the description. Thank you all for watching. It's been a long time. The format is a little bit different. I hope you enjoyed. If you want more content, consider subscribing or leaving a like or a comment. Let me know what you think. If you need help in building things similar to this, please send me messages on Messenger, on Facebook, on Twitter. Don't hesitate. I'm really glad to help when people try to undergo this by themselves, so it's the most fun part of this. Thank you all, see you next time.